Get down on your knees. Apologize. Now. My daughter-in-law said it, her voice cold as stone. At my son's wedding, the person who should have been honored the most was being ordered to kneel. My wife stood frozen. Her makeup barely smudged, just a thin streak. Around us, music kept playing, white flowers everywhere, hundreds of silent eyes watching. My son lowered his head and whispered for his mother to do it. I stepped forward. I helped my wife back onto her feet. Then I said slowly, "You just destroyed more than a wedding day. Before we go on, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, because the moment I'm about to share next didn't just change a ceremony. It forced me to see who truly stood for dignity and who quietly turned away. I stood there for a few seconds, long enough to realize the silence in the hall was louder than the music. No one laughed. No one stepped forward. Crystal glasses froze midair. The officiant stared down at his script like he'd dropped something he could never pick up again. My wife stood facing her daughter-in-law. Her shoulders trembled just slightly, not from fear, but from not understanding what had just happened. Amelia had prepared for this day for weeks. She's never liked being seen, never liked crowds, but she believed this was her son's day and that a mother should stand behind the scenes, quietly doing what needs to be done. She helped the bride adjust her veil when the lights shifted. One small gesture, one gentle touch. I saw it clearly. There was nothing that could be called a mistake. Laura spun around. Her face hardened. Not the confusion of a bride, but the anger of someone used to being indulged. She checked herself in the mirror, then looked at Amelia as if my wife had broken some sacred rule. "You ruined it," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut the air. "You need to apologize." Amelia opened her mouth. She hadn't even spoken yet when Laura stepped closer. There was a movement, fast, careless. Not something I want to name. Just a moment that crossed a line. My wife stumbled. Her hand instinctively reached for the floor to steady herself. Everything unfolded in front of me, painfully slow. "Kneel," Laura said next, this time without hiding it. "Apologize, in front of everyone." I looked around. Carefully made-up faces, expensive suits, people who had smiled warmly when they entered this estate. No one said a word. That silence wasn't accidental. It was chosen. Justin stood not far away. My son. I waited for him to lift his head. I waited for one simple sentence. It didn't even need to be loud. Instead, he walked over to his mother, bent down, and spoke softly, like he didn't want anyone to hear. "Mom, just do it. It's nothing. Her family is helping me a lot." I didn't feel anger right then. What came first was emptiness. I looked at the boy I had raised. The man I believed understood boundaries, understood dignity. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at his mother. His eyes were fixed on the bride's family, where quiet nods were already being exchanged. Amelia didn't cry. That hurt me more. She looked down at the marble floor where the lights reflected into cold streaks. I knew what she was thinking. She was asking herself what she had done wrong, to be standing like this on a day that should have been filled with blessings. I stepped forward. Not fast, not slow. I placed my hand on her arm, felt the faint trembling, and helped her stand upright. I didn't look at Laura yet. I looked straight at my son. Justin turned away. When I finally faced Laura, my voice was calm, loud enough for those nearby to hear, but not loud enough to turn it into a performance. "No one in my family kneels over a smudge." Laura gave a thin smile, the familiar smile of someone who believes they're standing higher than everyone else. "Do you know what day this is?" she said. "This is my day. You don't want to make a scene, do you?" I nodded. "Yes, it's your day." I paused. Just one beat. "And it's also the day you showed me what you value." No one understood what I meant. At least not then. I took Amelia's hand and led her away from the ceremony area. The music started up again, a little rushed. The officiant forced a smile, said a few words to patch the air. Scattered applause followed, late automatic. We walked down the long hallway, leading to the garden behind the estate. It was quieter there. I heard Amelia's breathing slowly steady. She didn't ask me anything. She just held my hand tighter. "I'm fine," she said softly, as if she needed to reassure me more than herself. I nodded. I know she's strong, but that strength was never meant to endure humiliation. It was built on self-respect. I took out my phone. I looked at the screen for a moment before calling, not because I hesitated, but because I wanted to be sure I was acting on principle, not anger. When the call connected, I spoke briefly. No long explanations. Stop. Temporarily close all related reviews. I'll send the official reason. I ended the call. No sigh of relief. No sense of release. Just the familiar certainty of a decision that had been considered long ago, waiting for the moment it became necessary. I turned to Amelia. Let's go home. Behind us inside the brightly lit estate, the wedding went on. But I knew some things had just been broken, and no blessing could ever put them back together. We left the estate as the Charleston sky faded into that pale afternoon gray. The cobblestone road ahead was still damp with missed cars lined up, waiting their turn to take guests home. No one noticed us anymore. At parties like that, silence disappears quickly, replaced by drinks, laughter, and whatever people are eager to forget. Amelia sat beside me in the car, her hands resting neatly in her lap. She looked out the window, saying nothing. I knew she didn't need comfort. What she needed was to know that what had just happened wouldn't be treated as something small, that her dignity wasn't left behind in the ceremony hall with the white flowers. As the car pulled away, I finally allowed myself to think back to that morning. 24 hours earlier, I had been standing in a windowless conference room, fluorescent lights bearing down on the table. Familiar faces sat across from me, tired but focused. Thick folders lay neatly marked in front of us. I'd spent most of my life in rooms like that, so the heavy silence of big decisions was nothing new. They call me a consultant, a word that sounds harmless enough. But in federal projects, a consultant stands at the line. The one who says yes, or not yet. The one who weighs not just numbers, but people. This port project was worth billions tied to hundreds of subcontracts. It wasn't just steel and concrete. It was security, reputation, things you can't fix once the foundation is poured wrong. The name Howard appeared on the proposed subcontractor list very early on. I knew him before I ever knew Laura would become my daughter-in-law. The financials of his real estate group weren't clean. Not bad enough for immediate rejection, but concerning enough to take note. Layered loans. Promises backed more by words than guarantees. I'd asked for deeper review, not out of spite, just professional habit. That evening, both families gathered for a rehearsal dinner, a meeting designed more for showing off than for bonding. Howard talked a lot about coastal properties, about close relationships, about how this federal project would be the final push to restore his company's former standing. He never said it outright, but everyone knew what he was waiting for. Laura didn't bother hiding it. She scanned the room as if assigning value to each person. When her gaze landed on Amelia, it carried something I recognized instantly. Contempt wrapped in a polite smile. Amelia stayed gracious. She asked questions. She listened, the way she always does with any family her son chooses to be part of. At one point, Laura leaned toward me, her voice light. "I hear you've retired. That's nice. Finally time to enjoy yourself." I smiled. I changed roles. She nodded, didn't ask another question. That silence said more than curiosity ever could. To Laura, some people don't need to be understood. They just need to be placed in the right category. I watched everything. No notes, no reactions. I wanted to see how they behaved when they believed there was nothing to lose. That has always been the most accurate test. And by the next morning at the wedding, that test ended. Very clearly. The car stopped in front of our hotel. I stepped out first and opened the door for Amelia. She placed her hand on mine for a brief second. A small gesture, but enough to tell me she had steadied herself. In the room, Amelia changed out of her evening gown into familiar clothes. She hung the dress carefully, smoothed the fabric as if it carried no memory at all. I watched her, then turned to the window. Outside, the city moved on as usual. No one knew a line had just been drawn. I picked up my tablet and reopened the notes from the meeting the day before. The numbers were still there, but now they carried an added weight. Leadership ethics aren't abstract. They show up clearly in how someone allows their child to treat others, especially those they believe to be beneath them. I drafted a short evaluation. No dramatics, no emotion, just observations, risks, indicators of management culture. I didn't need more evidence. I had just witnessed one of the clearest forms of it. When I sent it, my phone buzzed. A message from a familiar number. "Everything okay," 3 words. I replied, clearer than ever. I knew that across the city the wedding was still going on. Laura was probably smiling for photos, convinced the moment had passed. Howard was likely raising a glass with people he wanted to impress. They didn't know that some doors don't make a sound when they close. I set the device down and sat beside Amelia. She rested her head on my shoulder, tired, but at peace. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about contracts or projects. Just one simple truth. Some boundaries don't need to be announced. When someone crosses them, consequences find their way on their own. And sometimes, it all begins with a request that seems very small on a day when someone believes they're entitled to everything. That evening passed very slowly. Amelia went to sleep earlier than usual, probably from exhaustion. I sat alone at the small table by the window, watching the yellow light wash over Charleston's old walls. This city is used to big stories, old families, deals made quietly. So am I. But that night, everything felt heavier. I wasn't expecting anything to happen right away. In my line of work, consequences rarely arrive at the same time as the action. They come later, moving along proper channels. I knew the evaluation I'd sent wouldn't make noise. It would simply trigger a review, the kind every partner goes through. The difference was timing. The next morning I woke up before Amelia. I made coffee, opened my phone, and read the first updates. No message from Howard. That didn't surprise me. Men like him don't call before they understand what's happening. They wait. They probe. They look for another route. Late morning, my phone buzzed. An internal number, I answered. We've reviewed the file again, the voice said, calm and professional. There are some issues that require a temporary pause. I understand, I replied. Follow procedure. The call ended. I set the phone down and looked at my coffee, now cold. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt the familiar order of work sliding back into place. Early afternoon, things began to move more clearly. A short message came in from someone I knew in finance. The bank just activated a risk protection clause on Howard. No emojis. No explanation. People in that world don't need many words. I could picture it clearly. An urgent call. A polite but distant voice. Numbers read aloud. Clauses once ignored, now placed on the table. When a federal project stops being an anchor, everything tied to it becomes exposed. Amelia's phone rang right after. She glanced at the screen, hesitated for a second, then showed it to me. Justin's name. I didn't tell her what to do. She decided on her own. She answered, put it on speaker. Mom, where are you? My son's voice was different from the night before. No whispering. Urgent. At the hotel, Amelia said calmly. There's trouble here. Mr. Howard, his company's in trouble. Everyone's on edge. I looked at Amelia. She didn't look at me, but I knew she was listening to every word. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Justin went quiet for a few seconds. I don't understand. Does this have anything to do with? Yesterday, I held out my hand. Amelia passed me the phone. It has more to do with things than you realize, I said. Not just yesterday. On the other end, I heard him breathe in sharply. Dad, what did you do? I didn't answer right away. I did my job. You can't do this, Justin said, his voice rising. Their family is. Your future doesn't get built on your mother kneeling, I cut in. My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. If you think that's acceptable, then you've chosen the wrong place to stand. The call ended in silence. Amelia sat down on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry, but I saw her hands laced together, tighter than usual. That afternoon the news spread just far enough. No press, no cameras, just whispers among finance and construction circles. A contract crossed out, a guarantee pulled, a line of dominoes starting to fall. By evening I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I knew who it was before I answered. Mason Howard's voice said, trying to stay composed. We need to talk. You should talk to your lawyer, I replied. Just a few minutes, he pressed. There may be a misunderstanding. I looked out the window. There's no misunderstanding. There are things you've ignored for too long. Silence stretched on the line. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. She's young, he said. She doesn't understand? I have a child too, I said, and I'm responsible for how he behaves. The call ended with no agreement. I didn't need to hear more. Everything that mattered had already been said the day before. In the ceremony hall. In front of everyone. Late that night, after Amelia was asleep, one last update came through. No details. Just confirmation that the relevant agencies had begun reopening Howard's old files. Files once kept neatly closed by reputation and connections, now opened under a different light. I set the phone down, turned off the lamp, and lay beside my wife. In the dark, I listened to her steady breathing. I knew tomorrow wouldn't be easy. Justin would call again. Laura would react. Howard would try every angle. But there are moments in life when things have gone too far, and the only thing left is to let the truth do its work. I didn't need to push. I just needed to stop standing in the way. And somewhere in an estate where the wedding flowers were being taken down, they were probably starting to realize how a request that seemed very small can bring an entire structure down faster than anyone expects. The next morning, Amelia woke up later than usual. She stepped out onto the balcony and stood there for a long time, looking down at the street as traffic began to fill in. I didn't ask what she was thinking. Some thoughts need their own space to settle. I made tea, set it on the table, and waited. Near midday there was a knock at the door. Not rushed, but firm enough to say the person outside wasn't planning to leave quickly. I opened it. Howard stood there, no tailored suit like the night before. His jacket was wrinkled. His tie sat crooked. The face I'd seen so often in magazines now looked tired and much older. "I need to speak with you," Howard said. His voice was rough. "Just a few minutes." I looked at him, then at Amelia. She gave a very slight nod. We let him in. No handshake. No polite greetings. Howard sat on the edge of the chair, his hands clasped together. "Mason," he began, "we're both reasonable men. Things have gone too far." "No," I said. "Things are finally moving in the right direction." He looked up, panic flashing in his eyes. "All this over a small misunderstanding at the wedding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I cut in. "It was a choice." Howard turned to Amelia. "Mrs. Amelia, I'm sorry. My daughter behaved improperly. I'll speak to her." I assure you, Amelia didn't answer right away. She set her teacup down, folded her hands, and looked straight at him. "What are you apologizing for?" she asked. "For the way your daughter spoke, or because you thought there would be no consequences?" Howard fell silent. That question left him nowhere to retreat. Just then the door opened again. Justin walked in. I didn't know how long he'd been there. Maybe he'd been standing in the hallway, listening long enough to know what he was stepping into. He looked different. The confidence of the groom from the day before was gone. His eyes darted. To Laura, to me, then down at the floor. Laura followed him in. She entered as if the room still belonged to her. But the quick sweep of her gaze showed she already sensed the shift. No one was firmly on her side anymore. "What's going on here?" Laura asked. "Dad, why are you here?" Howard shot to his feet. "Enough," he said sharply. "You've caused enough trouble." Laura froze. It was probably the first time she'd ever heard that tone from him. "I only asked for an apology," she said. "What's wrong with that?" Justin turned to me. His eyes were red. "Dad, I didn't know it would come to this. I'm sorry." He stepped forward and knelt in front of Amelia and me. The motion was quick, instinctive, but I didn't see courage in it. I saw panic, the panic of someone who had just lost his footing. "Please give me another chance," Justin said. "I'll fix it. I'll leave her family's company." "I'll stand up," Amelia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but the room went completely still. Justin looked up, hesitated, then stood. She looked at her son for a long time. There was no anger in her eyes, only deep exhaustion. "What are you sorry for?" she asked. The same question she had asked Howard. Justin opened his mouth, then closed it. For letting things go too far." "No," Amelia said. "You're sorry because you chose silence when your mother was being diminished. You chose advantage over boundaries." Laura let out a short laugh. "This is ridiculous," she said. "All this over something small, and you're acting like I'm the villain." Amelia stood up. She walked to the table and opened the small box she had brought from home. Inside was the family ring, the one she had once told me she planned to give Laura as a welcome. She lifted it, the metal catching the light. "I was going to give this to you," Amelia said evenly. "Not because of its value, but because it represents a life built on mutual respect." Laura stared at the ring, her eyes flashing for a moment. "Then give it to me." Amelia closed the box. "No," she said. "You chose the wedding dress over human decency." The words weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but they landed in the room like a door closing. Softly, completely. Howard lowered his head. Laura stepped back, as if for the first time she didn't know where to stand. Justin remained in the middle, belonging nowhere. I spoke then for the first time since they'd entered. "Everything is clear now," I said. "There's nothing left to debate. Howard sighed, his voice small. Can you stop this? I looked at him. I didn't start this to stop on someone else's terms. They left shortly after. No goodbyes. The door closed, restoring the familiar quiet. Amelia sat beside me. She rested her head on my shoulder, lighter than the day before. I'm not sad anymore, she said. I'm just disappointed. I held her hand. I understood. Some relationships don't fall apart because of a major disaster, but because of a very small moment when people should have stood together and chose to turn away. Outside, the consequences were still spreading. But in this room, everything had ended in the clearest way possible. And sometimes, that's the only kind of justice life allows. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. No more pleading calls. No surprise visits. Everything moved the way large systems always do once the light is turned on. Files were reviewed again. Decisions were signed. No one needed to mention the wedding anymore, but everyone understood it had become the starting point. Howard disappeared from familiar parties and private gatherings. I heard he was spending most of his time with lawyers and stakeholders. Loans that had once been extended on personal reputation were now facing old questions, this time without a way around them. It wasn't punishment. It was consequence. Laura left Charleston not long after. She didn't call Amelia. She didn't message me. Through mutual contacts, I heard she took a regular job at a second-hand resale shop in another city. No one mentioned her background or the extravagant wedding. There she was, just new, learning how to greet customers, organize shelves, and clock out on time. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I just thought, maybe for the first time she was living in a space without privilege attached. Justin's path was harder. He called Amelia a few times, not to ask for money, but to say he was looking for work, that he'd moved out, that things were no longer easy. Amelia listened. She didn't scold him, but she didn't promise anything either. Some lessons can't be shortened by a parent's protection. You'll have to stand on your own, she told him in one short call. I believe you can, but I can't do it for you. I could hear Justin starting to understand that. Slowly, but honestly. He stopped talking about big plans and shortcuts. He talked about long workdays starting over small mistakes he was trying to fix. I didn't step in. Some journeys need solitude to mature. As for Amelia and me, we returned home a few weeks later. The house was the same. Quiet. Familiar. Amelia placed the box with the family ring on the highest shelf in my study. Not to hide it, but as a reminder that some things should only be given when the recipient understands their value. We used the money we had planned as a wedding gift to start something else. Nothing flashy. No press releases. Just a small fund to support people who had experienced abuse of power at work and at home. Amelia was more involved than I was. She listened to stories that were very similar and very different. People who had been told to stay quiet. People who had been told, it's nothing. Each time she came back from those meetings, she seemed lighter. She said being heard sometimes was already a good enough beginning. I believed her. Throughout my career, I had seen power used far too often to force people to bow. Far fewer were willing to use their position to help someone stand back up. One afternoon, we sat on the porch watching the sunlight fade behind the trees. Amelia made tea. I read a few pages, then set the book down. We sat in silence for a long while. Do you ever regret it? Amelia asked softly. I thought for a moment. No, I said. I just wish I'd recognized it sooner. She nodded. So do I. We sat there without needing more words. Some stories don't end with perfect reunions. Some relationships need distance for both sides to be safe. I accept that. Fairness doesn't always bring immediate happiness, but it brings long-term peace. A few months later, Justin stopped by. No warning. He stood at the door thinner than before, but his eyes were different. No longer searching for approval, just willing to meet my gaze. I came to say hello, he said. I know I haven't earned the right to ask for anything. Amelia hugged her son. Not for long. Long enough to say the door wasn't closed, but not wide open either. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Keep going, I said. You're doing the right thing. When Justin left, Amelia turned to me and smiled. It wasn't a sad smile. It was steady. That evening I sat down and wrote this story, not to claim credit, but to remember that moments which seem very small can shape an entire life. Real authority doesn't come from making someone kneel. It comes from what you choose to do when you have the power to stop it. If you were in my place, when would you give your child a second chance? Leave your thoughts in the comments. This story is only complete because you stayed until the end. Subscribe to the channel, tap like, and share, so stories about dignity, boundaries, and decency can keep being told. Thank you sincerely for listening. The message I want to leave is simple. True power isn't about forcing others to bow. It's about making sure they're allowed to stand upright. In any situation, respect is always the most valuable choice. I'll see you again in the next story.